in Atlanta for the answer. Andy, would you give him another chance at coaching, or do you think he deserves it?
He's going to have to go through quite a bit of rehab, and by that I don't mean physically go through rehab, although I know, he was sent supposedly to anger management. He's going to have to rehab his image. He right now is completely toxic. You could go back in the last 20 years, there have been coaches who are untouchable for various reasons, and I'm not trying to equate things, but obviously like Dave Bliss for what happened at Baylor, became toxic and no one was going to hire him. And I think because this issue transcended sports, went global, if you will, to mainstream media, to news outlets, I think it's going to be extremely difficult for anyone to touch him in the NCAA. And I'm going down D1, D2, D3. Someone would have to reach out, a coach, an athletic director, to get him on staff. And what's interesting, guys, is I talked to one of his former head coaches that he worked under, and he told me the other day, he said, look, when he was in practice as an assistant, we had to get him to speak because he wasn't that vocal. Things obviously changed when he became a head coach, but I think it'd be very, very difficult in the short term for him to be back coaching in college basketball.
Stephen A., you've been on the record saying you believe in second chances. Does Mike Rice deserve one?
That he does, not as a head coach. Does he deserve a second chance as it pertains to working in the industry again someday? Sure, I believe in second chances in regards to that. But I would never hire him to be the face of a program or to lead a program ever again. I can go as far as to say that because I would never trust him enough to do that again. I guess, Andy, for me, though, I would ask you this question. Do you believe somebody would take the chance of bringing him on as an assistant sometime, like certainly not right now, but maybe next season or the season after next? Could you see that happening?
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. I agree with you, Stephen. I believe in second chances, too. I do think that, a lot of these, especially if they're not criminal, you do deserve a second chance. The question is, would someone give him that second chance? And I think it has to be a very good friend, someone that wants to have his back and really wants to bring him back in. And so he's going to need those people for this to occur. He worked before for Phil Martelli and for Jamie Dixon. Are those coaches at some point going to feel comfortable enough to bring him back into the fold, to go to their athletic director, to go to their president, and say, you know what, he deserves a second chance? I do think this, if it happens, I think it will start out in one of those sort of auxiliary roles, like sort of the director of basketball operations or someone like that. I don't know if it would happen where he would start out on the floor, even as a second chance.
Andy, I believe that Mike Rice deserves a second chance eventually, and I think that ultimately, somewhere down the line, he will get one. But Andy, you mentioned a couple things that intrigued me. Number one, you talked about image rehab. To me, the issues that Mike Rice faces right now are deeper than image rehab. They might require some more literal rehab. I was intrigued by the comments from Coach Pitino from a distance about Mike Rice saying, gee, where did that come from? It came from a deeper place. And I think you'd agree, Andy, that these are issues. These are deeper issues that need to be dealt with first over a long period of time. And yet, nobody questions Mike Rice's ability to coach because some people might have forgotten he was a really good coach at Robert Morris, which is a low major. He got them the second, third year to the NCAA championship. To the tournament. Yeah,
and he should have won. They actually should have won the game that they. I think it was against Villanova. I was at that game in Providence in the NCAA tournament. They should have won the game. He kind of got robbed in that. But I agree with you, Skip, in that there are deeper issues. And I talked to him the day before he was reinstated in January, and he told me that, and I asked him, how are you going to change? And this is before I knew about the videotape, but I knew he had issues and obviously his anger issues and all that in coaching. He says, I'm not going to change the message, my passion, my intensity, but I have to change the way I deliver it. Now, I don't know because I haven't seen his practices from mid-January on, whether or not he did do that, whether or not he was able to do that.
That's a good point.
So at least he recognized that. at least he recognized that. He didn't want to change his passion, his intensity, or the message, but the way he delivers it. You know, right at this point, the way he delivered it in the past is everywhere. Everyone's seen it. And to wipe that away from everyone's mind, especially administrators, faculty, presidents. And the other thing I think that really hurts that we haven't discussed yet is, you know, the language. I think that's what makes it more difficult. If it was just the physical contact, if it was just the throwing the basketballs, and I'm not saying that's right, but I think the thing that took it to the next level were the verbiage and the anti-gay language that is not acceptable in today's society. Those kinds of statements, I think, take it to another level and make it very difficult on a college campus where diversity should be celebrated. Those things, you know, I think make it very difficult for him to be hired in the short term.
Fellas, Andy, Skip, let me chime in here, because, look, what about the Lithuanian player that he just berated for 2 years? 2 years? I mean, the dude, it was nonstop. If you're listening to Eric Murdoch, if you're looking at the video, if you listen to the kid who ultimately transferred, it was nonstop. Yeah, the verbiage was bad. The physical abuse. I mean, when you look at some of the passes, he didn't just throw it at their legs. He threw it at their hair. He threw it at their head, rather. He threw it at their groin area.
It's inexcusable.
I mean, he was just, he was doing all of this stuff. So what I'm saying, and then by the way, I understand what he did at Robert Morris. The dude finished 5-13 in the Big East. Let's not talk about him like he's the second coming of Jesus.
And that's why, and let me say this. That is why what makes no sense to me is that I was told by multiple sources there was no way Mike Rice was going to be coaching in the Big Ten. No way. So what makes no sense to me is when this occurred a couple months ago, when they had the chance to fire him and move on, the way other schools have done in the middle of the season, USC, for example, they had the chance. Why they were going to give him this 1 year in the Bridge Conference, now the AAC, next season, before they moved to the Big Ten, made no sense to me. If they were eventually going to fire him, you know, it came down to money, from what I was told, that they didn't want to pay him for 2 years. They're willing to pay him for one. And, you know, it makes no sense because they were going to get rid of him anyway. He was not going to coach in the Big Ten because he was not winning. He did not get an extension.
Andy, you're right. But here's my point. Doesn't that now bring us to Pernetti, the athletic director, and the extent that Skip and I were debating whether or not it was because that was his first big hire. Now we're hearing, I'm reading on ESPN.com how the faculty is calling for the president potentially to resign. I don't know what's going on right now. Where does the culpability stop from what you're hearing, Andy?
Well, I've been told it's a fluid situation. A source close to the Regents told me that someone's going to have to also fall. Now, whether that's the president or the athletic director, someone will. You know, the Big Ten question is very interesting here, and I talked to a Big Ten source yesterday. You know, had this blown up at the time they were getting invited to the Big Ten, you know, the source told me that one person, one incident didn't necessarily cancel out a long-term relationship. Clearly, the Big Ten wanted to get into the East Coast, try to get that Big Ten brand and Big Ten network into the New York metro area on a regular basis. But at that point, if this had all happened, perception-wise, could the Big Ten have taken Rutgers, you know, right now? I think it would have been very difficult to really sift through all this and then accept them into their brand. And so there was a lot of things swirling around. So just saying that Tim Pernetti got Rutgers into the Big Ten should save him, I think the issue's a little deeper here. I think they're going to have to look at, obviously, what he knew, when he knew it, why were these decisions made, who else did he tell, and before a decision is made on whether or not he is the athletic director at Rutgers. I mean, because there's a lot at stake for this university. You've got, obviously, it goes up to the State House, where Governor Christie's weighing in. So there's a lot at stake here going forward into the Big Ten, and they have to get their image and everything on the right path. And whether or not Pernetti or the president are the right people for that, they're going to have to decide here, I think, in the short term.
So, Andy, back to the original question about Mike Rice's future in coaching. Do you think he's even more toxic now off his individual actions than he would be off the typical scandal, the cheating scandal, the off-the-court kind of cover-up scandal that we've typically seen in college sports?
Yes, no question. You know, what we've seen before with NCAA violations, you know, sometimes it takes a little while. Kelvin Sampson went to the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's suddenly viable to be a head coach in the NBA and in college basketball.
Yeah.
And so he needed to sort of get out of college basketball for a little bit, and now he's fine to come back. And with the NCAA violations, that can occur rather easily. It just takes a little bit of time. But with this one, especially because it went so viral in the era that we live in now, because the verbiage, because the violent acts of throwing the basketball, and I hear all the time on Twitter the very players from the NBA have been tweeting saying, I can't believe no one, went up against him or threw a ball back or things like that. Come on, let's keep in perspective. He's in an authoritarian role in the practice court. If the player reacts to him, then it takes on a life of its own, and then it all shifts back to the player. So it's easy to say that now, but how many players really do challenge their coach, throw a basketball back at the coach, or really get up in his face? That almost never happens.
Yeah, good point, Andy. Thank you so much for joining us live from Atlanta. Stay warm. You said it's about 39 degrees out there?